The security cameras in the Saks Fifth Avenue department store flickered with the cold, grainy look of early 2000s surveillance footage. Under the sterile lights, a familiar face moved between the racks. It was the face America once adored, the face of a woman who defined an entire decade of Hollywood, a woman whose presence could carry a film, whose eyes could hold a generation hostage in a single close-up. That night, Winona Ryder walked into the store as one of the most beloved actresses in the world. 90 minutes later, she walked out in handcuffs. The tabloids exploded. Headlines screamed her name. Late-night hosts mocked her. And within hours, Hollywood, an industry she helped shape, began to erase her like she had never existed. How could a single moment, a single decision, shatter the career of someone who was once untouchable? Why did the world turn on Winona with such violence and speed? And more importantly, what was really happening behind the scenes that no one dared to talk about? Because the truth is, this wasn't just a shoplifting incident. It was a story about pressure, trauma, addiction, power, and a system that devours its own stars when they're most vulnerable. But to understand how America's sweetheart became Hollywood's outcast, we have to step away from the flashing cameras, step away from the courtroom, and return to where it all began. To understand how Winona Ryder went from the most magnetic presence on screen to a headline that felt like a punchline, we have to rewind the clock. Not to the courtroom, not to the store, but far earlier, to a time before the fame, before the pressure, before Hollywood even knew her name. Let me tell you a story. It begins in Northern California, in a quiet place miles away from flashing cameras and red carpets. A place where a young girl spent more time living inside her imagination than in the real world. Before she became the voice of a generation, she was just Winona Laura Horowitz, a shy child with oversized dreams and a world that didn't always understand her. 3. The Hollywood Winona Ryder stepped into was nothing like the Hollywood we know today. This was the late 1980s, a golden age of movie stars where charisma mattered more than algorithms, and one breakout role could transform a nobody into a cultural force. But beneath the glamour, it was also an unforgiving machine, powered by image, profit, and perfection. Studios controlled everything: careers, narratives, even identities. A young actress didn't just enter the industry, she entered an ecosystem where every move could be weaponized, where public opinion could turn overnight, and where fame came bundled with surveillance, scrutiny, and impossible expectations. Teen idols were the most fragile currency. The industry manufactured them, adored them, then replaced them the second they showed a crack. And at the center of this world, emerging like a quiet storm, was Winona Ryder. She didn't fit the mold of the typical Hollywood star. She wasn't loud, she wasn't polished, and she wasn't trying to charm the camera. She was something rarer, authentic, mysterious, intense. Her screen presence didn't feel constructed, it felt lived in, almost hauntingly real. By the early 1990s, Hollywood saw her as the face of a new generation. Magazine covers called her the voice of the misunderstood youth. Directors fought for her, studios built films around her, audiences saw themselves in her vulnerability. But there was an unspoken truth about the industry. The same qualities that make someone a star often become the very reasons Hollywood eventually turns on them. Winona's rise wasn't just fast, it was meteoric. And in a world where the higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes, that meteoric ascent came with a price she wouldn't fully understand until it was far too late. Before the world knew her as Winona Ryder, she was Winona Laura Horowitz, a quiet, introspective child growing up far removed from the bright lights of Hollywood. Her childhood unfolded on the edge of Northern California, surrounded by books, ideas, and the kind of solitude that shapes artists long before they understand what art even is. Her parents were intellectuals linked closely to writers, activists, and counterculture thinkers. Their home was filled with literature, political conversations, and unconventional ideas. It was a world that taught her to think deeply, to feel intensely, and to question everything. But it was also a world that made her different. So different that she struggled to fit in anywhere outside of it. As a young girl, Winona didn't socialize like the other kids. She read obsessively, stayed quiet, and often escaped into the safety of her imagination. At school, she was bullied for her looks, her clothes, her demeanor. She carried an emotional sensitivity that the world didn't always treat kindly. That sensitivity would one day become her greatest strength on screen, but also one of her deepest vulnerabilities. When she discovered acting, it wasn't fame she was chasing, it was refuge. Acting became a place where she could pour all the emotions she never knew how to express. A place where she didn't have to be the shy girl at school. A place where she could finally belong. That longing for acceptance, for identity, for emotional grounding became the engine of her early career. Directors saw in her what audiences would soon see too, a rawness that felt almost dangerous in its honesty. Her eyes held stories she had never spoken aloud. Her performances were not performances at all. They were confessions. But buried beneath that gift was a seed of fragility, the kind that forms when you grow up believing the world is something you need to protect yourself from. The kind that makes harsh criticism feel fatal. The kind that turns public pressure into a private storm. Winona's childhood didn't just create a star, it created a collision course. 5. When Winona Ryder finally broke through in Hollywood, it didn't feel like the rise of a young actress. It felt like the arrival of a cultural shift. Her breakout roles in films like Beetlejuice, Heathers, and later Edward Scissorhands made her the face of a new kind of stardom. One that wasn't built on glamour or perfection, but on authenticity and emotional depth. She wasn't trying to be America's sweetheart. She simply became it, almost by accident. By the early 1990s, Winona wasn't just acting in major films, she was leading them. Directors trusted her instincts. Audiences trusted her heart. Magazines called her the icon of the misunderstood. Young people saw themselves in her vulnerabilities. And Hollywood, always hungry for the next big thing, embraced her as its brightest star. But there was a hidden cost to becoming a generational figure. Winona was never built for the machinery of Hollywood. She was built for art, not for the relentless pressure of celebrity. As the spotlight grew hotter, so did the expectations placed on her. Studios demanded more. Press attention intensified. Every move, every relationship, every expression became public property. And then came the pressures no one outside the industry ever sees. Long shooting schedules, emotional exhaustion, the need to perform both on and off screen, the constant demand to be perfect even when she felt anything but. Her highly publicized relationship with Johnny Depp only poured gasoline on the fire. They were the power couple of their era, two young icons photographed as if they were royalty. But the attention was suffocating. When the relationship eventually ended, the heartbreak wasn't private. It unfolded across magazine covers, talk shows, tabloids. Every headline felt like a judgment. Winona began to crumble under the weight, but quietly, so quietly that Hollywood didn't notice or didn't care. Behind the scenes, she battled insomnia so severe it left her barely functioning. Doctors prescribed medication to help her sleep, to help her cope, to help her survive an industry that devours the sensitive. But the prescriptions only masked the cracks. They didn't heal them. And while her career continued to soar, the emotional cost was beginning to show. A misstep here, a moment of fragility there. Nothing catastrophic, not yet. But the pressure was building. And in Hollywood, pressure rarely dissipates. It breaks. The signs were subtle, like small fractures forming beneath the surface of a flawless image. The public saw a star reaching her peak. They didn't see the version of Winona quietly falling apart behind hotel room doors. Every ascent has a threshold, an invisible point where the climb becomes unsustainable. For Winona Ryder, that threshold was approaching faster than anyone realized. By the late 1990s, Winona Ryder was more than a movie star. She was Hollywood royalty. Her resume was stacked with critically acclaimed roles, major box office hits, and 2 Academy Award nominations. She had reached the kind of cultural relevance most actors never experience. And then, almost without warning, the pressure caught up with her. It began quietly, small signs most people dismissed as exhaustion or overwork or the unavoidable burnout that comes with fame. But for Winona, they were symptoms of something deeper, an emotional and psychological collapse she could no longer outrun. During the filming of Girl, Interrupted, a movie centered around mental health and institutionalization, Winona found herself absorbing the emotional weight of the role in ways she had not anticipated. It wasn't just acting anymore, it was excavation. She later said she related to the character's emotional state so intensely that she felt she was unraveling internally. But Hollywood doesn't pause for unraveling. It demands more. After years of insomnia, physical injury, chronic stress, and emotional exhaustion, doctors prescribed painkillers and anti-anxiety medication, drugs meant to help her cope. But the drugs didn't heal anything. They dulled the edges. They softened the pain. They blurred the line between functioning and failing. And then came the breaking point. On December 12, 2001, Winona Ryder walked into the Saks Fifth Avenue store in Beverly Hills. What happened next became one of the most sensationalized scandals of the decade. Security footage captured her walking through the luxury aisles. She was calm, collected, unhurried. She appeared to be browsing, examining items, trying on clothes. But as the tapes later revealed, she also removed tags, placed items into her bag, and walked toward the exit without paying. To this day, psychologists, legal experts, and even people close to her debate her state of mind during that moment. Was it intentional? Was it a cry for help? Was it a medication-fueled spiral? The truth is more complicated than a headline, but the headlines didn't care about complicated. Store security detained her. The police were called. Cameras flashed like gunshots as she was escorted out in handcuffs. In that instant, years of carefully cultivated goodwill evaporated. The media pounced on her like predators smelling blood. The story should have ended as a minor celebrity mishap. But it didn't. Hollywood had been waiting, knowingly or not, for a moment of weakness. And when it came, the industry devoured her. The prosecution framed Winona not as a struggling actress overwhelmed by emotional turmoil, but as a symbol of entitlement, a privileged celebrity who thought she could get away with anything. It didn't matter that she had no prior record. It didn't matter that she was dealing with serious mental health challenges. The narrative was already written. Tabloids had a field day. Late-night hosts crafted entire monologues around her. Newspapers printed exaggerated accounts. No one cared about the context. No one cared about the truth. And Winona, already fragile before the incident, was now thrust into a legal battle under the harshest public scrutiny imaginable. During the trial, the prosecution presented video evidence of her removing tags and concealing merchandise. They revealed the inventory list, approximately $5,000 worth of designer items. They introduced testimony from security guards. The jury watched her actions replayed over and over again on a screen, stripped of context, stripped of humanity. Winona remained composed, but behind that composure was a woman who had lost control of her own narrative. Hollywood watched silently from the sidelines. Friends distanced themselves. Studios panicked. Insurance companies labeled her a liability. And when the verdict came, it was devastating. In November 2002, Winona Ryder was convicted of grand theft, vandalism, and burglary. Though she avoided jail time, the damage was irreversible. The sentence included probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. But the real punishment came from Hollywood itself. The roles stopped. Scripts stopped arriving. Agencies stopped calling. Reporters stopped asking about her craft and started asking about her downfall. She didn't just lose work, she lost identity. She disappeared from the industry almost overnight. What many people did not know, because the media never bothered to ask, was that Winona was dealing with severe emotional exhaustion, long-term insomnia, and dependence on medication prescribed legally by her doctors. She was fragile in a way that fame never allows its icons to be. And in the aftermath of the trial, as the world mocked her, something even darker unfolded. She withdrew completely. No red carpets, no movie premieres, no interviews. For 4 long years, one of Hollywood's brightest lights vanished into silence. By the time the world realized what it had done to her, it was too late. The industry had taken a deeply human moment, born from pain, exhaustion, and vulnerability, and turned it into a spectacle, a punchline, a warning, a scandal. But every scandal has an unseen layer. And the twist in Winona's story, the truth behind her disappearance, is far more haunting than the tabloids ever revealed. When the courtroom lights faded and the headlines slowly began to move on, Winona Ryder found herself standing in a silence that was louder than any scandal. Hollywood had not simply punished her, it had abandoned her. Studios that once fought for her signature now refused to insure her. Directors who once praised her talent quietly replaced her. Even journalists who once celebrated her sensitivity now treated her like a cautionary tale. It wasn't the legal sentence that exiled her. It was the industry's collective decision to pretend she no longer existed. For someone whose identity had been shaped by storytelling, by connection, by the fragile magic of performance, the exile was devastating. In interviews years later, Winona revealed something the world never knew back then. She took a break not because she chose to, but because she emotionally couldn't continue. Her mental health had collapsed under the pressure long before the Saks incident. The scandal didn't begin her downfall, it exposed it. She spent years away from film sets, years away from cameras, years away from the version of herself the world believed she was. During this time, she focused on healing, a word rarely used in Hollywood and even more rarely respected. She read constantly, returned to quiet living, surrounded herself with a small circle of trusted people, and stepped away from the kind of expectations that had once suffocated her. And in that solitude, something unexpected happened. The industry began to miss her. As the 2010s approached, a new generation of directors who had grown up idolizing her films started entering their prime. To them, Winona Ryder wasn't a scandal. She was an icon, a muse, a symbol of an era when vulnerability on screen felt frighteningly real. Darren Aronofsky cast her in Black Swan, not as a redemption story, but as an artistic acknowledgement of the emotional depth she always carried. It was a supporting role, but it was the first sign that Hollywood was ready to re-examine the narrative it had created for her. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 2016, Winona Ryder returned to the center of global culture, not through a blockbuster film or an Oscar campaign, but through a streaming series set in a small Indiana town haunted by supernatural forces. Stranger Things didn't just revive her career. It reminded the world why they fell in love with her in the first place. As Joyce Byers, she delivered the same emotional intensity that made her a star decades earlier. Raw, haunting, desperate, human. Except this time, the world was finally ready to understand that intensity for what it truly was. A gift. Her comeback wasn't loud or flashy or triumphant in the traditional Hollywood sense. It was quiet, earned, honest. And in the contrast between her exile and her return, one truth became impossible to ignore. Hollywood didn't destroy Winona Ryder. Hollywood revealed how deeply it had misjudged her. Winona Ryder's story isn't just the story of a fallen star. It's the story of how an entire system can fail the very people it claims to celebrate. A story about what happens when a sensitive, emotionally honest human being is placed inside a machine that demands perfection, punishes vulnerability, and profits from collapse. Her so-called downfall was never about theft. It was about pressure, about mental health, about a culture that still struggles to understand the weight of visibility. Winona's story exposes the uncomfortable truth that Hollywood doesn't create stars to protect them. It creates stars to use them, until the moment they break. But what makes her story remarkable isn't the scandal, it's what comes after. Winona Ryder didn't fight her way back with PR campaigns, image rehabilitation, or orchestrated reinventions. She didn't call in favors or plead for relevance. Instead, she let time, honesty, and authenticity do what Hollywood rarely allows. She let herself be human, and in the end, that humanity became the very thing that brought her back. Her journey forces us to confront a larger question about the culture we live in. Why are we so eager to idolize people one moment and so ready to tear them apart the next? Why do we punish vulnerability when it's the very thing that makes storytellers worth listening to? And how many artists have we lost? Not because they lack talent, but because we lack compassion? Winona Ryder's comeback is more than a career revival. It's a quiet revolution, a reminder that healing is possible, that the world can change, and that sometimes the most powerful form of resilience is simply surviving long enough for people to see you clearly again. But the real question is this: if the same scandal happened today, in a culture obsessed with outrage and instant judgment, would Winona Ryder be given a second chance at all? Or would she disappear forever in the noise? Let me know what you think. And if this story moved you, you may want to hear about another Hollywood icon whose career was destroyed by a single moment. It's a story just as haunting and just as revealing about how fame can shape or shatter a life.